A favorite pastime of Sega fans and critics alike is taking the company to task for its many mistakes. Most of us have engaged in numerous conversations where we drop opinions on why their consoles failed and why they are no longer in the hardware business. I want to take that down a notch in this episode and just discuss some smaller topics about things I wish that Sega had done differently. Nothing that would have changed their fate, but more a case of making things a little more fun and appealing for its customers. We are going to touch on the Sega CD, the Genesis, the Saturn, and even the portable Game Gear and Nomad. This is another one that's just for fun, and I hope you share some personal choices of your own down in the comments. Let's waste no more time and get right to it. Little things I wish Sega had done differently. I think that many of us had some pretty lofty expectations when it came to the Sega CD back in 1992. With all that extra hardware inside it, I personally had dreams of sprite scaling ports galore. As we know, this didn't happen, leaving us with a library that had some real gems, but overall never lived up to its true potential. And with that, we have my first choice of things I wish that Sega had done differently: big releases done on the CD format, as well as cartridges. What I mean by this is that once it was clear Japan wasn't going to be making tons of games that would appeal to international audiences, I wish that Sega had started dropping CD versions of popular Genesis games on the Sega CD. We could have had Streets of Rage 2 CD with better sound effects, a Shinobi 3 CD with animated cutscenes, a Phantasy Star 4 CD that didn't cost $100. I mentioned this before on my channel. Once the Sega CD had reached a point where Sega knew it wasn't going to invest in new IPs for the device, they should have just offered current owners access to games that were either mildly enhanced or discounted thanks to the cheaper format. This likely would have done nothing for new sales of the hardware, but it could have gone a long way to extend some goodwill to those that had purchased the add-on deep into its lifetime. And I think this could have been especially nice considering the potential of compilation-style releases. A Golden Axe edition with all three games: Streets of Rage, Sonic, Shinobi, Phantasy Star, Shining Force. I mean, there could have been some rather killer compilations beyond the older stuff we received early on. The Sega CD was an expensive piece of hardware, and I just feel Sega could have done a little more for the folks that paid all that money. And sometimes, it's the little things that count the most. Backwards compatibility is a hot button topic whenever new console hardware comes up, even back in the 90s. And this is the one area I really wish that Sega had made the Saturn compatible with Genesis cartridges. Before the peanut gallery chimes in about expense and complete redesigns, this actually would have been much easier than you think. The vanilla Saturn has two things in its makeup that could have made this a real dream come true for those of us that still enjoyed our Genesis games. First, the Saturn has a cartridge slot, and second, the Saturn has a Motorola 68000 already in its guts. That means all Sega really needed to do was design a very simple and very inexpensive adapter that would have accepted Genesis cartridges and had the rest of the hardware it needed to run. This again is not far-fetched in the slightest, as Sega had already started combining Genesis chips down into streamlined versions, which means this could have been very much a possibility on the Saturn. This cart could have been sold for $50 and even been used as a pack-in for a special promotion around the holidays that first year the Saturn was on the North American market. As a fan of both these consoles, I would have been one that really appreciated this feature, especially since some great Genesis games continued to be released well into the life of their 32-bit ambitions. Would it have sold a few more Saturns as well? Who knows? But I still feel this was a real missed opportunity to make fans a bit happier with their purchase. Sticking with the Sega Saturn for a minute, I would also like to add that I really wanted Sega to release its RAM expansion cartridges in the West. These devices did not have a ton of games attached to them, yet some of those games were really incredible. Back in the old days before the 4-in-1 devices, me and my friends were hot swapping import converters, killing our Saturns trying to play this stuff. Many of the RAM cart releases, while perfectly playable, were still in Japanese, so English localizations would have been nice. I also think this was a real missed opportunity for Sega to show Saturn owners some love, as the retail market came crashing down for the device. Seriously man, the Saturn was $400 at its launch, and just 2 short years later, it was virtually dead as far as new software releases. Giving customers a chance to score some late-release Japanese games that looked and played so much better on the Saturn would have given Sega some consumer attention in the empty months leading up to the Dreamcast. Again, I don't think this would have sold new hardware to customers, but I do feel that it would have been a great gesture to fans and a potential small revenue stream for products that were already developed and finished. Sega was getting black eye after black eye as far as public relations for years at that point, and the last thing they needed was another abandoned platform and fans being left feeling ripped off. I know my friends and I would have been first in line had Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Darkstalkers 3 made their way stateside, and I think many of you would have as well. I think that one of Sega's best innovations during the 16-bit era was its SVP chip. It's also one of the most underutilized innovations. In fact, Sega didn't really mess around with enhancement chips at all for the Genesis, leading us to my next wish that they had really doubled down on that. The Genesis was originally released in Japan in 1988 as the Mega Drive, meaning it was out for 2 years before Nintendo's 16-bit option even showed up on the market. That also meant that Sega's technology was older, and I feel enhancement chips could have gone a long way to help with that fact as it continued to age. Imagine had there been a sprite scaling chip to help arcade ports look better, a chip to help with perfect digitized voices so games like Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat sounded much better. The SVP itself was an expensive chip, so a standalone release likely would have been a better option after its debut in Virtua Racing, and I think it had the potential to do really well. Sega could have dropped Virtua Fighter, Star Wars Arcade, and even added special stages and effects to games that would open up if it detected the chip. Nintendo made some surprisingly good stuff using enhancement chips for its consoles, but Sega didn't really seem interested. I personally would have loved to have seen what they could have done and how some of the games would have turned out. Had Sega done things well enough in this regard, they may never have made the mistake of the 32X. Our next entry is one that I think may be a tad bit contentious, especially among my European viewers. When the Game Gear launched in 1991, I was smitten with its color backlit screen. Seriously, this was such a massive upgrade from the Game Boy, it was night and day, and playing through stuff like Castle of Illusion and Shinobi were some of my best portable experiences of that time. But as much as I love the Game Gear, the one area I really wish that Sega had gone a different direction was sound. The PSG of the Game Gear was pretty much the same stuff we had heard on the Master System, and when it was rough, it was absolutely ear-piercing to me. While I can admit that some games used PSG quite well, many did not, making me really want an FM solution for the Game Gear. Sega had released the YM2413 FM-based sound unit for the Master System in Japan, and it's this chip that I really wish they had gone with inside the Game Gear. I realize this would have broken Sega Master System compatibility for most games, but I can't help but feel that in the long run I would have appreciated it much more. For some of you this is not going to sit well, but as a fan of FM synth, I would have been far happier with that option. If you have watched my channel long enough, you know I am not a fan of the Dreamcast Controller. And to be clear, This isn't a dislike that is simple. I actually hate the Dreamcast controller. There is nothing about its design I find appealing. The sharp plasticky directional pad is awful. One single analog stick is a joke. Only 4 face buttons. The wire coming out the damn bottom. There is nothing left here of the great designs that Sega had before. What I never understood is that Sony's dual analog and DualShock controllers were a year and a half old when the Dreamcast was released in Japan, so Sega was well aware of how well received the design was. They already had the perfect directional pad and the perfect number of buttons on the face. All they needed to do was modify things for 2 analog sticks and a new set of shoulder buttons. Hell, modern solutions pretty much show you what Sega needed to do, and these options absolutely shit all over the original Dreamcast pad in every single way. I would have even taken Retrobit's redesign of the Saturn analog pad as an option. These days it's no issue thanks to devices like the Brook adapter, but once you hold a well-designed controller in your hands while playing a Dreamcast game, you realize what a truly garbage design that original controller actually was. I don't think I've ever spoken about it before, but I was not a fan of Sega's North American marketing for the Saturn. I will even go so far as to say that it was off-putting enough to hurt sales. From the bald chick making stupid faces, to the dancing moron with the ridiculous hat, to the nonsensical celebrity endorsements. Nothing about these campaigns made anyone want to check out Saturn or its games. Sega ads for the Genesis had attitude and swagger. They made the point that Sega games were something to get excited about, something to gloat over, and something cool to play. But this stuff for the Saturn was just not gonna have the same effect. And it boggles the mind that the executives at Sega of America didn't have the sense to see that. Who approved this trash? Who sat there and watched any of the images you are seeing on your screen and came away with the idea that this was going to make kids and young adults run out and buy a Saturn? Watching this on TV and seeing ads in magazines made me wonder, had I chosen the wrong machine? Sega had some ups and downs for all of us, but the marketing for the Saturn in the United States was nothing short of disgraceful. It wasn't funny, it wasn't cool, it wasn't mysterious, it wasn't exciting, and it sure as hell wasn't selling Saturns. Our last entry concerns Sega's 16-bit portable, the Nomad. This was essentially a portable Genesis, complete with 6-button face and the ability to play the vast majority of the Genesis library. When this sucker was released in 1995 for $179, it was actually a fantastic deal. That color screen was a beauty, and having Genesis visuals and sound on the go was a dream come true. But like the Game Gear before it, the one thing that sucked to high heaven was the fact that Nomad ate batteries like there was no tomorrow. 6 AA batteries got you 4 hours if you were lucky. To combat this, Sega created a handy little power pack for the Nomad, and honestly, this should have been packed in with the unit. Sega took a lot of heat from the press and gamers alike over the Game Gear's battery life, and to turn around and do it again with the Nomad was a really bad look. Had there been a rechargeable solution out of the box, even one that only provided a few hours of gameplay, it could have offset some of that heat. I know I would have appreciated it because taking the Nomad anywhere outside of the home was a huge pain in the ass. I do confess I love this little guy to death all the same. I wasted away many a night playing NBA Hang Time, Mortal Kombat 3, and Gargoyles. I just really wish that it had an includable rechargeable solution out of the box. So there we are guys, 8 things I really wish that Sega had done differently. Choices like these are highly personal, so I expect many of you may have a differing opinion. I would love to hear what some of you think Sega should have done differently, especially when it comes to the little things. We can talk all day long about how they could have been more successful, but I am finding the more personal the topic becomes, the more interesting it is. Should enough of you share your stories of things you would have changed, maybe we will revisit this topic again with a viewer episode in the future. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.